Happy Friday, everyone. It's me, John Lorden, here with another episode of BrainScratch for today, January 19th, 2018. Before we get started on today's case, I have to give a very big thank you to my associate producer and sometimes researcher, Christy Strayciner. She did the footwork on pulling this case together. Thank you so much, Christy. We got an interesting one for you here today. You know, sometimes I like looking into cases that might be involved with UFOs. This one has a little hint of that. It's kind of a missing persons case, but some of the theories out there are he could have gone off with aliens. Some of the other theories are perhaps he just left. He just wanted to get away from his life. Or there's even a theory that maybe he blew himself up. Very interesting case we're looking into today. This is the case of Granger Taylor. And just to whet your appetite a little bit, here is an image of an actual spaceship. Well, kinda. Let's get into the details here. Starting over at mysteriousuniverse.org, and I have to say, I've used Mysterious Universe as a source on this channel a few times, and I think I've done a pretty good job of calling it out, but just in case I haven't, I really enjoy reading articles written by Mysterious Universe. Rob Morphy did a fantastic job on this case. And let me tell you why. I know there's a lot of websites that seem like they're in this category. Few of these websites actually take these cases this seriously to put in all the footwork, to search out the sources, and to really compile the best version of the truth in this case. And that's exactly what Rob did here. You can tell he's very passionate about his work. He's also a very good writer. So if you are interested in this case and you want to see more about this case, hit the description box below, check out the sources, look for the link to Mysterious Universe, and prepare for a very enjoyable read. Of course, I'm not going to read their work word for word here, but we are going to go through a lot of this article. As I said, they're citing such good sources. It's hard not to. So first, let's start with learning a bit about Granger Taylor. And this is a case that we're reaching back a number of years. Granger Taylor was born on October 7th, 1948. He lived in Duncan, Vancouver Island, a logging and fishing town in the Canadian province of British Columbia. Taylor lived with his mother and his stepfather in a wooded, I think it's Saminos. I'm sorry, Canadians, if I'm saying that wrong. Saminos, possibly. Lake property until the day he vanished. He was an 8th grade dropout, but despite the lack of education, he was considered by all who knew him to be a self-taught mechanical wizard, and he did a lot of amazing things in his life. He worked as a welder, a mechanic, and he was repairing heavy machinery. At the age of only 14 years old, he built a single-cylinder automobile. At 17, he managed to rebuild a bulldozer that more seasoned mechanics had long since given up for dead. In 1969, while still in his early 20s, he plowed a trail through over half a mile of dense forest in order to get to the ramshackle remains of a locomotive. He then basically hauls that thing back to his shop, starts working on it. In less than 2 years, he managed to restore the locomotive to its former glory. In 1973, the province of British Columbia purchased the steam engine and sent it out on tour before they put it on display at the BC Forest Discovery Center. Some pretty amazing things that this guy did very early in life. Taylor transformed from an awkward boy into a 6'3", 240-pound bear of a man who his friends took to calling Gentle Ben. Apparently, he was a very kind soul. In all of the stuff that I've read about him, people really seemed to love him. It doesn't seem like anyone really had any problems with him. I don't think he had any known enemies or anything like that. People really seemed to really like Gentle Ben. Taylor got his pilot's license and bought a vintage Kitty Hawk warplane, which he restored. It actually wound up on the outside of a store as a display for a while, and then a restorer of vintage aircraft bought it in 1981 for $20,000. So as you can see, this guy's talents are making him some pretty good profits. 20 grand in 1981. That's a lot. That's a lot of cash. Always seeking something new to test his vast intellect and mechanical prowess, Taylor built himself a quasi-futuristic sanctuary Granger's flying saucer, and that is the image that we started with. He actually built this thing. If you look at the top and the bottom, the rounded sections, those are actually parts of satellite receiver dishes. Remember, back in the day, especially in the 80s, if you were getting satellite broadcasts, particularly for television or anything, the receiver dishes were huge. I mean, like 15 feet in diameter. They were these big giant things, not the little 24-inch, direct TV things that we have nowadays. So he built this life-sized replica of a flying saucer, kind of what he imagined a flying saucer to be. It had a television in it, a couch, a wood-burning stove. He became obsessed with finding out how flying saucers were powered, spending hours sitting in the ship thinking and often even sleeping there. This is a guy that was so mechanically minded. I mean, think of the things that he did as a young man, all of those brilliant accomplishments that he made. I think he kind of got to the point where he felt like he could fix anything that was at least man-made. And now he's starting to imagine, okay, if there are aliens, what type of power source are they going to use? How are they going to propel objects? And he starts looking into UFO information because the only information that he can get to kind of point him in the direction of understanding how these things could be powered are encounters that people have had, or if they've seen UFOs. So he starts absorbing as much of that information as possible as well. Taylor began his research into the UFO phenomenon by collecting all the books that he could get his hands on. The article also mentions this was an easy task in the 1970s. I don't think it's any accident that a lot of the times when we're looking into UFO cases, particularly on this channel, they're coming from the 70s or even the 60s. Remember, pop culture just had this intense drive towards spaceships and aliens and all of that stuff starting in about the 1950s. And we're kind of back in it now, and especially in terms of our superhero culture and that kind of stuff that also reaches out into the cosmos a lot. But 1950s, 1960s, there was a lot of that thinking in popular culture. So yeah, certainly a lot of books that were being written about that at the time. He was trying to understand the machinations of UFOs based solely on eyewitness accounts and pseudoscientific hypotheses that the authors of these books put forward. I think it was not a terrible approach. I mean, if you believe in that and you're trying to figure out how it works, obviously you're going to try to soak up as much information as you can to understand, what the potential limits of that are, what the benefits of that technology are. There's all kinds of different ways to look at that. So I get why he's soaking himself in this. Taylor confided to his friend Nielsen that during one of his periods of self-imposed isolation aboard his saucer, he received what can only be referred to as a message from space. Quote, and this is Nielsen speaking, he said it happened when he was in bed. He lay there and got mental communications with somebody from another galaxy. He couldn't see them. I said, they can't just be mental, but he said it was like they were talking just to him and to his mind. He was asking questions about the means for powering their crafts. Of course he is, right? This guy wants to figure out how their engines work and then rebuild it. The only thing that they would tell him was it was magnetic. 2 days later, Taylor informed Nielsen that the disembodied voice had once again visited him in his saucer, and this time the alien being invited him to go on a trip through the solar system. Taylor made no pretense at concealing his exhilaration about the coming journey and all that he was going to learn about the aliens' technology during his, quote, 42-month interstellar voyage. According to Nielsen, Taylor was thrilled by the prospect of his approaching interplanetary odyssey. Just a week before Taylor's enigmatic exodus, he took a bunch of his buddies out for a ruckus night on the town for what was intended to be a sort of going-away party. Really interesting there, because one of the theories is that maybe he was struggling in his life in some way and he's looking to get away and he's kind of building up this story. But he's literally going out with a bunch of his friends and having kind of a going away party. In some of these cases, if we're talking about someone struggling with depression or something along those lines, I don't think that is a common step that they take. He really seemed to believe that he was being taken away on this trip and that he was going to be away for a prolonged period of time. He took additional steps, which will definitely point to that. On Friday, November 28th, and this is happening in 1980, if I recall correctly, the evening before what would be considered by many to be Taylor's last night on Earth, the young man entered his stepfather Jim's bedroom and expressed his affection and gratitude for all that the man had done for him over the years. Jim had no idea that this would be his last conversation he would ever have with his stepson. Taylor's mother, Grace, was in Hawaii at that time, taking the first vacation that she had in years, and she would forever regret not being home that last night that Taylor was there. Speaking of the last time he was seen, about 6 p.m., he entered Bob's Grill for dinner, as he had a bunch of times before. The last person to admit to seeing Taylor was a woman who was working in the grill's kitchen by the name of Linda Barron. Linda Barron remembered that he wore a brown knitted sweater zipped up front, a black t-shirt, which apparently he was known for. He was always wearing black t-shirts, jeans, and logger boots. She also noted that he didn't have his winter coat, and apparently this was a really stormy night. Strangely, his stepfather discovered the coat a couple days later inside the sturdy doghouse that Granger built for his huge Newfoundland dog, Lady. Once again, just kind of seems like he thinks he's going away. You know, he's taken his friends out. Now he is leaving his coat with his dog in his dog's doghouse. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Barron then testified that Taylor paid his bill and left the restaurant at about 6:30 p.m. And that's not all that he left behind. Let's jump over to Vice.com to continue this story a little bit. You can see they've got another picture of his spaceship home here. On the evening of November 29th, 1980, 32-year-old Granger Taylor left his parents a peculiar note before vanishing from their farm in Duncan. The note read, "Dear Mother and Father, I have gone away to walk aboard an alien spaceship, as recurring dreams assured a 42-month interstellar voyage to explore the vast universe, then return. I'm leaving behind all my possessions to you, as I will no longer require the use of any. Please use the instructions in my will as a guide to help. Love, Granger." And I have to say, when I first heard the term "my will" come up in this letter, it kind of concerned me. And also him saying that he's not going to require the use of any possessions. It just strikes me strange because he's talking about only being gone for 42 months, just over 3 years. And don't you assume that when he comes back, he might actually need some of those things? I don't know. I'm not sure. And here we actually have a photo of Granger Taylor. I believe this came from his sister. In Taylor's own will, so he also left behind, from what I understand, actually 2 wills. He crossed out the word death and replaced it with departure. According to a local newspaper, the Times-Colonist, there was also some sort of map drawn on the back of the note. And if we jump forward a bit, I did find a website that has reprinted this article that was written in the Times-Colonist Monday, March 18th, 1985. The name of the article is Vanished Son Adrift in Space? Let's go ahead and jump through some of this, just get some more detail. The silver spaceship sits on metal pillars under trees at Jim and Grace Taylor's farm near Duncan. Once again, they're showing the picture of the spaceship that he built. Its aluminum plate ramp door was ajar and broken. The Taylors suspect from children playing. But inside, the large old sofa, pot-bellied stove, and plywood sleeping ledge are much the way their son Granger left them. The Taylors desperately want to believe their son will come back, but after 51 months, it's tough to keep up hope. On the other side of the note was a contour map of Mount Waterloo, west of Duncan, near Scuts Falls. If the map has any hidden meaning, no one knows what it is. The 42 months were up last May 29th. The Taylors left the back door unlocked that night just in case he showed up, but he never did. I can hardly believe Granger's off in a spaceship, his father said, but if there is a flying object out there, he's the one to find it. And down here, we actually have a photo of his mother and stepfather, I believe, and the letter that he left behind, which is a little hard to make out, but if you squint a little bit, certainly seems to line up word for word with what we're reading on these sites. Let's jump back over to Vice and continue. Police were called and a search ensued. However, neither Taylor nor his Datsun truck were found. I just wanted to point out that in a few instances, they talk about his truck being bright pink, but that article, which I consider a pretty close source of truth, I mean, this is a news article from back at that time, says that it was actually blue. So I don't know where this bright pink truck came from, but from what I'm seeing, it looks like it was probably blue. One would expect the car at least to be found. Corporal Mike Demchuk of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police told the local paper, "You just don't get rid of something that large without someone knowing about it." Very true. You know, one of the things in missing persons cases when I'm looking into those is always, where is the vehicle? And when a vehicle disappears with a person, that is a bit of a more rare occasion, and you really have to think, what could happen to a vehicle? You know, where could it be hidden? Did it get to a chop shop? Whatever. But here we've got a case where him and his truck are essentially missing. Taylor's friend, Robert Keller, told Vice he did have dreams that they, the aliens, were coming to get him. Here we also have a photo of his sister checking out the wing of an airplane on their property. A bunch of great photos in this Vice article as well, if you want to dig into this. Keller said that he and Taylor met through a mutual hobby, smoking pot. And one of the many recurring conversations they had while getting high was the topic of space and aliens. Quote, "I think he was a genius borderlining on insanity," Keller added. And Keller apparently was very close to him. Apparently Granger was a bit of a mentor to Keller, really taught him a lot. They spent a lot of time together. But now we're getting some more information here. You know, he's smoking pot. Is that the worst thing in the world? I personally don't think so. Could that alter his mindset in terms of him thinking that he's being communicated to? I think most people that understand it at a much better level than I do, and especially clinically, would say probably not. I don't think pot is known for inducing any type of hallucinations like that. According to family members, in the months leading up to his disappearance, Taylor had been doing a lot of acid. Now that flips the script. From what I understand, I don't have first experience here, but you're talking a hallucinogen here. You're talking where you can see things that aren't really there, maybe hear things that aren't really there. Does this start to make sense about how he's communicating telepathically with aliens if he's doing acid? Possibly. Quote, "He was taking acid a few times a day during the last few months," Taylor's sister, Grace Ann Young, told Vice. A couple of times a day, seems like he might have been using it pretty consistently. It's strange because in one way, to me, it's almost pointing to he's having to escape from something about his reality. If you look at what's gone on here, this is a guy that had a lot of pretty amazing accomplishments at a very young age. We don't hear a lot about what he did after his early 20s, and he is now into his 30s. He's still living on the property with his mother and his stepfather. Did he feel bad about that for some reason? Was there some level of depression or something he was dealing with around that? I don't know. In March of 1986, almost 6 years after Taylor's disappearance, local forestry workers found a blast site near Mount, I don't know if it's Prevost or Prevost, not far from Taylor's parents' house. According to the Montreal Gazette, human bone fragments were found at the scene. Quote, "Until further evidence is found, the RCMP is assuming these are Taylor's." The coroner's office concluded Taylor had been carrying dynamite in his truck, and at some point, whether on purpose or by accident, it went off. His friend Keller said that Taylor often stored dynamite in his truck to blow up tree stumps, which was a common practice at the time. Keller added that Taylor had handled dynamite on countless occasions and knew how to handle these types of explosives. There is another article that I want to jump to here. We've got it over on Google News. It's a clipping from the Gazette. And here they give us just a little more detail than Vice did. A week ago, however, 2 pieces of bone were found at the blast site, and a pathologist confirmed they are human. However, from what Christy or myself could find, no one has been able to do any type of DNA test on those bone fragments to confirm that they are indeed, possibly related to his family members. So still a little bit of a question out there in terms of, are those bone fragments him? There's also a little bit of information about the vehicle identification. You're talking a dynamite blast site. So how much objects are really left behind there? The way that these articles are reading, extremely little, like they're finding fragments embedded in trees. So it kind of raises a question. I don't know a lot about dynamite myself. What type of amount would it take to completely destroy a vehicle and all but incinerate a person in that? I'm not sure. I'm just not sure about the feasibility of it. Taylor's stepsister, Joan Mayo, believes that Taylor was lonely. He had his own way of doing things. He was just different, she told Vice. But his sister, Grace Ann Young, thinks the acid probably had something to do with Taylor's death. One of Young's last memories of her brother is him asking to come stay with her and her roommates at their place in Vancouver. She told Taylor she didn't think her roommates would approve of that. Of course, I'm sure she regrets that. To this day, probably. Just before we built the spaceship, Taylor had said if he wanted to disappear, all he would have to do is grow a beard and move to another country, and no one would friggin' know where he was. And that was his buddy Keller that was saying that. Keller thinks that, quite simply, it was his struggle fitting in that contributed substantially to his disappearance. So, if we look at this from people that are close to him, you've got one person saying, yeah, she thinks that he was really lonely. You've got another person saying he was basically bullied, even though he was so big. He really struggled to fit in. You've got his sister saying he was asking to come stay with me, and I kind of said no. And then, next thing you know, he's gone. It certainly, for me, seems like it's pointing towards a guy that is struggling within his own life. And did this fantasy come up about him leaving on the spaceship, or was it a side effect of the acid use compounded with the emotions that he was going through? I think there's a strong possibility of that. Quote, "It was like losing a brother, a father. The thought of not having Granger around was killing me. Granger was my mentor. I am who I am because of that guy," Keller said. Now, there is a little information on Wikipedia here about an area named Mount Sicker, which apparently is where this vehicle was found. Mount Sicker may contain the answer to a local UFO mystery. Local newspapers reported that a logger on Mount Sicker spotted a crater in the ground and metal debris embedded in a tree. It is believed that Granger was carrying explosives in his truck at the time of his disappearance. RCMP reported that the debris contained a VIN number. So I've seen mention of that in a few places, that they actually found a VIN number in the wreckage of the vehicle, and that's how they know for certain it was his Datsun. But I cannot find the source of where that information is coming from. So I think we have to take that one with a little bit of a grain of salt. And of course, remember, outside of that, they only found a few bone fragments. Seems like they were human, but no testing done to truly confirm if they were Granger or not. A lot of interesting conversations going on online around this. There is a Reddit thread. Someone whose name has been deleted here, sounds like trademark mental illness, drove off into the wilderness and died of exposure. It is fascinating that they never found the vehicle, though. Definitely a consideration there. The reference to a will makes it seem like suicide could have been on his mind. I think it's a possibility. It's strange because of the way that he is setting everything up, the way that he goes out with his friends. But then on the flip side of that, the mentality of going out with your friends, of him being this social person, at least social enough that he had people that were this close to him. I mean, he took on a guy that he was mentoring. I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence about what he was dealing with, if this is some type of emotional breakdown that led him to this. Over at blogspot.com, another article on this, which has some pretty interesting comments. I don't think conventional explosives that people could own would be able to blow a person into such small fragments and certainly not a truck. He may have gone to Vancouver. Some parts of that city are as close to other worlds as we get in Canada. Pretty funny statement at the end there. But once again, pointing back, I am not an expert. I don't know how much dynamite it would have taken. But what does occur to me, I know a little bit about explosions, is like if he had a bunch of dynamite in the back of his truck and that blew up, certainly it would damage the back of his truck, but I don't think it would necessarily incinerate it. It's not the same as if the inside, if it was like a vehicle, like a car, and inside of the cab, he had stuffed it with dynamite and then blew that up, because you have the cab that is actually containing the force at that point, and that allows the pressure to disperse in a completely different way. If that dynamite is just facing the open air, yes, it's going to blow down and it's going to blow out a little bit, but force goes where the easiest place is. So I'm kind of wondering about this whole thought that it was dynamite that was able to just blow this guy's truck to bits. Unless that explanation is just being oversimplified, and through the years, we just don't really have the truth of it. Maybe there was more there than just a hole in the ground and some metal shrapnel in the trees around it. It's really tough. I don't know. Cheryl says, I think Jim Taylor got sick of his stepson's stupid shenanigans and sent Taylor out to the great beyond himself. Interesting, Cheryl. I'd be very curious to see what type of relationships you have with your family. Graham Clayton, apparently there was a bad storm on the evening when Taylor disappeared. Maybe he was driving and ran off the road into a deep ravine or gully. I think Graham's raising a decent point. There could be some aspect of accident that might have had to do potentially with the explosion in some way. So I just wanted to pull up a map real quick so you can get some idea here. Just another interesting aspect of this case. So Duncan is where he was living at the farm here. Now, on the back of the note that he left his parents was a topographical map of Waterloo Mountain. And I've marked that way down here in the lower left-hand corner. Where his vehicle is actually found, it's Mount Prevost here, but the Wikipedia article is saying that it's Mount Sicker. I imagine that it's probably somewhere between these two where it was actually found, but you can see that's just a completely different direction, not quite as far of a drive as Waterloo. So once again, just raises the question, why was the map of Waterloo on the back of the letter? Or was it truly a map of Waterloo? Was that assumed by someone at some point? Was it really a map of one of the other mountains that he actually wound up near? I'm really not sure. That is why this is a brain scratch. And now I turn it over to you guys. Let's talk about it in the comments below. What do you think is going on with this case? Is there any other information out there that you may have bumped into that we didn't cover on today's case? Please share that with us in the comments below. And I don't know, could aliens really have taken Granger off on a 42-month? Maybe they didn't understand what a month was properly. Maybe he's still going to come back someday. I don't know, guys. It's a really strange one. The drugs angle kind of grabs my attention in a significant way because it speaks to a few things. First of all, it gives us potentially a reason why he was hearing these voices, but it also points to maybe he was struggling in his life in some way. But it seems like it's a heartbreaker of a story any way you cut it, because there was a lot of people that really cared about him. He was a guy that obviously was extremely talented. Did he just kind of burn out on fixing things and decide that there wasn't much left here for him? I don't know. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope each and every one of you out there has a wonderful weekend. Please come back to the Lord and Arts channel on Monday, and let's do it all again. Take care, everyone. See you soon.